The letter trembled in Grayson's hands, its edges worn from nights of rewriting, each word a shard of his heart. He stood outside the Grand Seattle venue, the muffled laughter of wedding guests slicing through him like a blade. His brother's rejection, "You can't come," Gray. "It'll make things awkward," echoed louder than the music spilling from the open windows. Grayson Cole, 26, had always been the quieter sibling, the one who listened while his older brother, Nathan, commanded the room. Growing up in their conservative Tacoma household, Grayson learned early to hide parts of himself, his sketches, his dreams, his truth. Coming out at 19 had been like stepping onto a tightrope, and Nathan's cold silence had pushed him off. Now, 5 years later, Nathan's wedding to Sophia was the final wall between them, built on a foundation of unspoken rules. Family comes first, but only if you fit the mold. The autumn air bit at Grayson's knuckles as he clutched the letter. He'd written it for Nathan, a last attempt to bridge the chasm, but doubt gnawed at him. Would his words even matter? He glanced at his phone, the screen glowing with a text from Ezra. His boyfriend, "You don't have to do this alone. I'm here." Ezra's support was a lifeline, but this was Grayson's fight. He tucked the letter into his jacket, took a breath, and walked toward the venue's side entrance, where he'd slip it to a waiter to pass to Nathan. No confrontation, no scene, just a plea on paper. Inside, the reception hall shimmered with chandeliers and white roses. Grayson lingered in the shadows, watching guests in tailored suits and glittering dresses swirl across the dance floor. Nathan, 30, stood at the center, his broad shoulders filling out a crisp tuxedo, laughing with Sophia, whose lace gown glowed under the lights. They were the picture of perfection, the kind her parents always wanted. Grayson's chest tightened. He'd once imagined standing beside Nathan at a moment like this, not as an outcast, but as family. He handed the letter to a waiter with a whispered, "Please, give this to the groom." The man nodded, disappearing into the crowd. Grayson's heart pounded as he retreated to the chilly courtyard, the weight of his choice settling in. He wasn't sure if Nathan would even read it, let alone understand. The letter held everything: his pain, his love, his hope for reconciliation. It was raw, unfiltered, and terrifyingly honest. Grayson met Ezra 3 years ago at a Capitol Hill art gallery, where Grayson's charcoal sketches were on display. Ezra, 25, a barista with a knack for poetry, had lingered by a drawing of a stormy sea, his green eyes tracing every line. "This feels like it's screaming," he'd said, and Grayson, usually guarded, felt seen. Their first date was coffee-turned-late-night talks under string lights at a rooftop bar, their hands brushing as they shared stories of dreams and scars. Ezra's warmth had thawed Grayson's walls, but even he couldn't erase the sting of Nathan's rejection. Back in the courtyard, Grayson's phone buzzed again. Ezra's voice came through, steady and soft. "You okay?" "Gray." Grayson leaned against a stone pillar, the Seattle skyline twinkling in the distance. "I don't know," he admitted. "What if he throws it away?" Ezra's reply was firm. "Then you've said your truth." That's enough, but it didn't feel like enough, not yet. Inside, the music paused, and a microphone crackled. Grayson froze as Nathan's voice filled the air, calm but unsteady. "I got something I need to share," Nathan said, his tone cutting through the chatter. Grayson's breath caught. Had the waiter delivered the letter already? He edged closer to the open window, heart racing, as Nathan began to read aloud. Dear Nathan, I've spent years trying to be the brother you could love. The words hit Grayson like a wave, his own voice echoing through Nathan's. Guests murmured, some confused, others quiet. Sophia's hand rested on Nathan's arm, her eyes wide but encouraging. Grayson's letter wasn't just a plea, it was a mirror, reflecting their shared childhood, the fights, the laughter. In a moment, Nathan turned away when Grayson came out. It spoke of Grayson's love for Ezra, the life he'd built despite the pain, and his hope that Nathan could see him not as a mistake, but as family. Nathan's voice broke on the final line. I don't want to lose you, but I can't lose myself either. The room was silent, the weight of Grayson's truth hanging heavy. Grayson pressed his back against the cold wall, tears stinging his eyes. He hadn't expected Nathan to read it, let alone to a room full of strangers. Was this acceptance or exposure? Sophia stepped forward, her voice gentle but clear. Grayson, if you're out there, please come in. The words were a lifeline, but fear rooted Grayson in place. What if this was a trap? A public shaming? Ezra's earlier words echoed. You've said your truth. Taking a shaky breath, Grayson stepped toward the door, his heart a drumbeat. He didn't know what waited inside, forgiveness, judgment, or something in between, but he was done hiding. Grayson's shoes clicked against the polished floor as he crossed the threshold, every eye in the room turning toward him. The chandeliers cast a golden glow, but the weight of the stairs felt like a spotlight burning through his skin. He scanned the crowd, cousins he hadn't seen in years, aunts whispering behind their wine glasses, and Nathan, standing frozen at the center, the letter still in his hand. Grayson's navy blazer felt too tight, his pulse a wild rhythm in his throat. He locked eyes with Nathan, whose face was a storm of emotions, regret, shame, maybe even relief. Sophia, radiant in her gown, stepped toward Grayson, her smile soft but resolute. Your family, she said, loud enough for the room to hear. You belong here. The words were a balm, but Grayson's gaze stayed on Nathan, waiting for his brother to speak. Nathan cleared his throat, the microphone still in his grip. I didn't know how to do this, he started, his voice low. I thought keeping you away would make things easier for Mom, for Dad, for me. He paused, glancing at the letter. But I was wrong. I read your words, Gray, and I saw you. Really saw you. The admission hung in the air, fragile but heavy, and Grayson felt a crack in the wall between them. The room remained silent, the guests caught in a moment they hadn't expected. Grayson's mind flashed to their childhood, building forts in the backyard. Nathan teaching him to ride a bike, the way they'd laugh until their sides hurt. But he also remembered the day he came out, Nathan's face hardening, their parents' disapproval sealing the rift. You chose them over me, Grayson said, his voice steady but raw, cutting through the quiet. You let me go. Nathan flinched, but he didn't look away. I know, he said, and I'm sorry. The apology was a whisper, but it carried the weight of years. Grayson's throat tightened, torn between relief and the ache of old wounds. He wanted to believe Nathan, but trust was a fragile thing, broken too many times. Sophia touched Nathan's arm, then turned to Grayson. He's been carrying your letter all day, she said. He didn't know how to face you until now. Her honesty disarmed Grayson, and he noticed the way her eyes flickered with empathy, not judgment. She wasn't just Nathan's bride. She was an ally, someone who'd pushed Nathan to confront his own fears. A woman in the crowd, Grayson's aunt, Linda, stood abruptly, her lips pursed. "This is a wedding, not a therapy session," she said, her voice sharp. "Can we move on?" Murmurs rippled through the room, some in agreement, others in discomfort. Grayson's stomach churned, the familiar sting of rejection rising. But before he could respond, Nathan raised a hand. "No," Nathan said, his tone firm. "This matters. Grayson matters." He stepped closer to Grayson, the letter crumpled in his fist. "I don't want to lose you either," he said, echoing the letter's final line. The room blurred in Grayson's vision, tears threatening to spill. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear those words until now. Ezra's absence weighed on Grayson as he stood there, exposed. He wished his boyfriend were beside him, grounding him with a touch or a glance. But Ezra had stayed back at their apartment, respecting Grayson's need to face this alone. "I'll be waiting," Ezra had said, his voice warm like always. Grayson clung to that promise now, a tether to his courage. Nathan gestured to a chair at the head table. "Stay," he said simply. It wasn't a command, but an invitation, one Grayson hadn't heard in years. He hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down. Staying meant risking more pain, but leaving meant giving up on the brother he still loved. He nodded, a small motion, and took a step forward. The band struck up a slow song, breaking the tension, and guests began to drift back to their conversations, some casting curious glances at Grayson. Sophia pulled him into a quick hug, whispering, "I'm glad you're here." Her warmth was genuine, and for the first time, Grayson felt a flicker of belonging. But as he sat at the table, watching Nathan return to his bride, he wondered if this was a new beginning or just a fleeting moment of grace. Grayson's chair at the head table felt like a borrowed space, the weight of eyes still lingering as he sipped his water. The band played a soft jazz tune, and the clink of glasses mingled with laughter. But Grayson's mind was elsewhere. Nathan's apology had cracked open a door, but years of silence couldn't be undone in a single night. He glanced at his brother, now dancing with Sophia, their smiles bright but tinged with something unspoken, guilt, perhaps, or hope. Grayson's phone vibrated in his pocket, and he slipped it out to see Ezra's name. "You still breathing?" "Hero," the text read, with a heart emoji. Grayson smiled despite himself, the knot in his chest loosening. He typed back, "Barely. Wish you were here." Ezra's reply was instant. "Say the word." "And I'm there." The thought of Ezra's steady presence tempted Grayson, but he needed to navigate this alone, at least for now. Across the room, Grayson's parents sat at a table with relatives, their faces unreadable. His mother, Ellen, wore a navy dress, her lips tight as she whispered to his father, Richard. They hadn't spoken to Grayson since he arrived, their silence louder than any words. Growing up, Ellen had been the one to bandage his scraped knees. But when he came out, her warmth turned to distance, as if his identity was a betrayal. Richard had been blunter. "This isn't what we raised you for." Their absence tonight stung, but Grayson refused to let it define him. A cousin, Marcus, approached, his grin cautious but friendly. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Man," he said, clapping Grayson's shoulder. "That letter, damn. Took guts." Grayson nodded, unsure how to respond. Marcus wasn't close, but his words felt like a small bridge, a reminder that not every family member saw him as an outsider. Still, the room was a minefield of judgment, and Grayson felt every step. Nathan returned to the table, his tie slightly loosened, and sat beside Grayson. "I didn't know it hurt you that bad," he said quietly, his eyes on the tablecloth. "I thought, I don't know, that you were fine without us." Grayson's jaw tightened. Fine? He'd spent years rebuilding himself, finding love with Ezra, creating art that spoke his truth. But fine wasn't the same as whole. "I wasn't fine," Grayson said, his voice low but firm. "You were my hero, Nate. When you shut me out, it was like losing half of myself." Nathan's face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked like the boy who'd once defended Grayson from bullies. "I was scared," Nathan admitted, "of what Mom and Dad would think, of what everyone would say. I took the easy way out." Grayson wanted to stay angry, to let the hurt fuel him, but Nathan's honesty disarmed him. "You could have talked to me," he said. "Even once." Nathan nodded, his eyes glistening. "I know. I want to fix this. Gray. I don't know how, but I want to try." The sincerity in his voice was new, fragile, but real. Grayson felt a spark of hope, but trust would take time. Sophia joined them, her presence a quiet anchor. "Grayson, Nathan told me about your art," she said, her smile warm. "I'd love to see your work sometime." The offer caught Grayson off guard, a reminder that Sophia wasn't just Nathan's wife, but someone who saw him as more than a problem. "Maybe," he said, a small smile breaking through. "I've got a show coming up in Fremont." The conversation shifted to lighter things, Sophia's love for photography, Nathan's terrible cooking attempts, but Grayson's mind kept drifting to Ezra. He wanted to share this moment, to tell Ezra that maybe, just maybe, his family wasn't lost forever. But as the night wore on, he noticed his parents' table emptying, their absence a silent statement. They hadn't approached him, hadn't acknowledged the letter. The hope in Grayson's chest flickered, but he pushed it down. Tonight wasn't about them. It was about Nathan and maybe a new beginning. As the reception wound down, Nathan pulled Grayson aside. "I want you to meet my friends," he said, gesturing to a group laughing near the bar. "They've heard about you. Good things. I promise." Grayson hesitated, then nodded. For the first time in years, he felt like his brother's brother again, not an outcast. But the night wasn't over, and Grayson knew the hardest conversations were still to come. The bar area buzzed with laughter as Nathan introduced Grayson to his friends, a mix of college buddies and coworkers who greeted him with easy smiles. "So you're the artist," one of them, a guy named Leo, said, raising his glass. "Nathan's been bragging about your sketches." Grayson blinked, surprised. Nathan had never mentioned his art before. He managed a nod, the warmth of the moment clashing with the cold absence of his parents, who'd left without a word. Grayson excused himself to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe. The mirror reflected a man caught between hope and hurt, his dark eyes shadowed but alive. He splashed water on his face, thinking of Ezra's text, "Say the word." "And I'm there." He pulled out his phone and typed, "I need you." Within minutes, Ezra replied, "On my way. Be there in 20. Relief washed over Grayson. Ezra's presence would ground him. Make this night feel real. Back at the reception, the dance floor pulsed with energy. But Grayson's gaze kept drifting to the empty table where his parents had sat. Their silence was a wound that wouldn't close. But Nathan's efforts tonight, reading the letter, inviting him to stay, were stitches. Imperfect, but holding. Grayson rejoined Nathan, who was now joking with Sophia about their first dance. "You should have seen him trip," Sophia teased, nudging Nathan. Grayson smiled, the ease between them a glimpse of what family could be. When Ezra arrived, he stepped into the venue like a burst of light, his gray sweater hugging his frame, his blonde hair catching the chandelier's glow. Grayson's heart lifted as Ezra spotted him and wove through the crowd, his smile both shy and certain. "You made it," Grayson said, pulling him into a quick embrace. Ezra's hand lingered on Grayson's arm, a quiet anchor. "Wouldn't miss it," Ezra said, his green eyes scanning the room. "This place is fancy." Nathan approached, his expression curious but warm. "You must be Ezra," he said, extending a hand. Ezra shook it, his grip firm. "Heard a lot about you," Ezra said, his tone light, but with an edge that said he knew the history. Nathan nodded, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I'm glad you're here," he said, and Grayson felt the sincerity, a bridge being built one step at a time. The night deepened, and Grayson and Ezra joined the dance floor, swaying to a slow song. Ezra's hand rested on Grayson's waist, their steps unpracticed but natural. "You okay?" Ezra whispered, his breath warm against Grayson's ear. "Getting there," Grayson replied, his voice soft. The room faded, and for a moment, it was just them, two men carving out a space for love in a world that didn't always make room. But the moment shattered when Grayson's mother appeared at the edge of the dance floor, her face a mask of disapproval. "Grayson," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "We need to talk." Ezra's grip tightened, a silent promise to stay close. Grayson nodded, steeling himself. He'd faced Nathan's rejection and survived. Now, it was time to face his parents. Ellen led them to a quiet corner, Richard standing behind her, his arms crossed. "This isn't the place," Ellen began, her eyes flicking to Ezra. "You're making a scene." Grayson's jaw clenched. "I was invited," he said, his voice steady. "Nathan wanted me here." Ellen lieb seemed. Nathan's confused. "You know how we feel about this." She gestured vaguely at Ezra, who stood tall, unflinching. "This is my life," Grayson said, his voice rising. "Ezra's my life. You don't get to choose who I love." Richard stepped forward, his voice low. "You're still our son, but we can't condone this." The words were a punch, but Grayson didn't flinch. "Then you're choosing to lose me," he said, the truth raw and final. Ellen's eyes glistened, but she said nothing, turning away as Richard followed. Grayson's chest ached, but Ezra's hand found his, grounding him. "You did good," Ezra whispered. Grayson nodded, the weight of the night settling in. He'd lost his parents' approval, but he'd gained something else, his voice, his truth, and maybe, just maybe, his brother. Grayson stood in the quiet corner, Ezra's hand a steady anchor as the echoes of his parents' words lingered. The reception carried on, oblivious, with laughter and music filling the air. But Grayson felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. He'd spoken his truth, drawn a line, but the cost was heavy. His parents' rejection was no longer an abstract fear, but a reality carved into the night. Ezra squeezed his hand, his green eyes steady. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said, his voice low but fierce. Grayson nodded, his throat tight. "I know," he whispered, leaning into Ezra's warmth. The weight of the confrontation with his parents pressed down. But Ezra's presence was a reminder that he'd built a life worth fighting for, a life where love didn't come with conditions. Nathan approached, his face etched with concern. "I saw Mom and Dad talking to you," he said, glancing between Grayson and Ezra. "What happened?" Grayson hesitated, the rawness of the moment still fresh. "They don't accept me," he said simply. "They never will." Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Grayson saw the old protectiveness flare in his brother's eyes. "They're wrong," Nathan said, his voice firm. "I was wrong, too, for too long. But I'm here now. Gray." The words were a lifeline, and Grayson clung to them. Nathan's change wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it gave Grayson something to hold on to. Sophia joined them, her expression soft but resolute. "Your parents need time," she said. "But this family, our family, includes you." She gestured to herself and Nathan, a quiet promise that Grayson wasn't alone. The reception began to wind down, guests drifting toward the exits, their voices softer now. Grayson and Ezra stayed, helping Nathan and Sophia gather gifts and decorations. The simple act of working together felt like a small victory, a step toward rebuilding what had been broken. Nathan joked about his terrible packing skills, and Ezra laughed, his ease lightening the mood. Grayson watched them, a warmth spreading in his chest. This was what he'd missed: connection, not just with Nathan, but with a family that saw him for who he was. As they loaded gifts into Nathan's car, Grayson's phone buzzed with a voicemail from his mother. He hesitated, then played it, keeping the volume low. Ellen's voice was strained, formal. "Grayson, we're not ready to understand, but we don't want to lose you. Call us when you're ready." The message was a crack in the wall, not an apology, but a gesture, however small. Grayson deleted it, unsure if he'd ever call. Some bridges took longer to build. Ezra noticed the shift in Grayson's expression and pulled him aside. "You okay?" he asked, his hand brushing Grayson's cheek. Grayson leaned into the touch, the night's emotions crashing over him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm glad you're here." Ezra smiled, his eyes soft. "Always will be," he said, and they stood there, the Seattle skyline glittering behind them, a silent promise of tomorrow. Nathan called them over, holding up a bottle of champagne. "One last toast," he said, pouring glasses for the four of them. They stood in a small circle, the air cool and the city quiet. "To family," Nathan said, his eyes on Grayson. "To starting over." Grayson raised his glass, his heart full but heavy. He clinked it against Ezra's, then Nathan's, and finally Sophia's, the sound sharp and clear in the night. As they sipped, Grayson felt the weight of the letter, the wedding, the years of silence, and the fragile hope of reconciliation. He didn't know what the future held, whether his parents would ever come around. Whether Nathan's change would last, but for now, he had this moment. He had Ezra's hand in his, Nathan's apology, and Sophia's kindness. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to keep going. The champagne bubbles lingered on Grayson's tongue as he stood with Ezra, Nathan, and Sophia under the starlit Seattle sky. The wedding venue was nearly empty now, the last guest gone, leaving only the hum of the city and the weight of the night's revelations. Grayson's heart was a tangle of hope and hurt, but for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't carrying it alone. Nathan set his glass down, his expression serious. "Gray, I want you in my life," he said, his voice steady. "Not just tonight, but for real. Dinners, holidays, all of it." The offer was raw, unguarded, and Grayson saw the boy who'd once been his protector, not the man who'd turn away. "I'd like that," Grayson said, his voice catching. "But it's got to be real, Nate. No half measures." Nathan nodded, his eyes steady. "I'm in. All the way." Sophia squeezed Nathan's hand, her smile a quiet endorsement. Grayson glanced at Ezra, who gave a small nod, his presence a reminder that Grayson had already built a family of his own, one that loved him without conditions. They parted ways with promises to meet soon. Nathan and Sophia heading to their hotel, Grayson and Ezra walking hand in hand toward their apartment in Capitol Hill. The city was alive around them, streetlights casting soft glows on the pavement, the air crisp with autumn. Grayson felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because he'd spoken his truth and been heard. The letter, the wedding, Nathan's voice reading his words aloud, it had all shifted something fundamental. At their apartment, Ezra pulled Grayson onto the couch, their bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. "You were brave tonight," Ezra said, his fingers tracing patterns on Grayson's arm. Grayson shook his head. "I was terrified," he admitted. "But you being there, it made it possible." Ezra's smile was soft, his eyes bright. "We're a team, Gray." "Always." Grayson thought of the letter, now tucked in Nathan's pocket, its words a bridge between past and future. He thought of his parents, their voicemail a faint flicker of possibility, but one he wasn't ready to chase. He'd spent too long seeking their approval, bending himself to fit their mold. Now, he knew his worth wasn't tied to their acceptance. It was in the life he'd built, the love he shared with Ezra, the art he poured his soul into. The next morning, Grayson woke to a text from Nathan. "Brunch next Sunday? Just us four." Grayson smiled, typing back, "Count us in." He set the phone down and looked at Ezra, still asleep, his blonde hair mussed against the pillow. Grayson's heart swelled, not just with love, but with gratitude for a partner who saw him, scars and all, and chose him every day. Weeks later, at his art show in Fremont, Grayson stood beside a new piece, a charcoal sketch of two hands clasped, one calloused, one soft, set against a stormy sky. Nathan and Sophia were there, their presence a quiet promise kept. The gallery buzzed with admirers, but Grayson's eyes kept finding Ezra, who stood across the room, his smile a beacon. The sketch was for him, a testament to their love, their resilience. Grayson's journey wasn't over. His parents' silence lingered, a shadow that might never fade. But he had Nathan's outstretched hand, Sophia's warmth, Ezra's unwavering love. He'd been banned from his brother's wedding, cast out for being himself. But his letter, his truth, had opened a door. Not to a perfect ending, but to a life where he could stand tall, loved and whole, in a world he'd fought to make his own.